They bring their experience in affordable housing, real estate, and public design innovation to discuss the realities and aspirations of designing healthier, more compassionate spaces in New York City and across North America. We'll begin with short presentations and then move into a conversation about the challenges confronting the creation of affordable housing.
Good evening. All right. Perfect. All right, thank you, Sheetza, for the introduction, and thank you to Healthy Materials Lab and Parsons for inviting me, and by extension, Bernheimer Architecture, to participate in today's program. Parsons feels like a second home to me. It's been many years since I've been back, so it's always a delight, so thank you for having me. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am just a small part of the collective effort at Bernheimer Architecture to design a better life for New Yorkers. I would not be here today if it weren't for the passion and dedication of Andy and my colleagues to the work of building affordable housing. At Bernheimer Architecture, we deeply care about the health and resiliency of the communities which we serve. The backbone of our work is multifamily housing, in particular, affordable housing, and often for seniors and the formerly unhoused. Our work will soon span all 5 boroughs and impact hundreds of lives. The difficult siting of many of our projects reflects a handicap endemic to the affordable housing development in New York City. From the outset, our projects are burdened by noise, environmental pollutants, located in flood zones or at the boundaries of complex zoning districts, or in areas with limited access to fresh and healthy food. As such, we need to be confident that the homes we are building won't be yet another item on the long list of hazards faced by our tenants, each of whom is just the nucleus of the many people, places, and ecosystems that are impacted by the materials that we specify. Even in spaces like corridors, our material selection is critical in communicating the care that we take for both physical and psychological wellness of our tenants. Even one change to one material can have wide-reaching consequences. For example, each tenant can feel confident that their apartment is free from endocrine disruptors, carcinogens, or asthmagens. That protection extends to the building staff, who likewise come into frequent, long-term contact with these materials in the building, common areas, and office spaces. The dozens or even hundreds of tradespeople handling that material during construction and renovation will be far less likely to encounter leaching plasticizers or VOCs that can cause respiratory distress or even chronic illnesses. But the impact of our material choices does not stop at the property line. Over the ensuing decades, thousands of individuals will live and work in our buildings. The cumulative improvements to their health and wellness means that they will live longer, more fulfilling lives, extending that benefit even further to their families and to their communities. By prioritizing the specification of healthy, resilient, and attractive materials, we can inspire others in the AEC industry to follow our lead, reinforcing demand for healthier products and for transparency in manufacturing. Finally, at a national and global scale, embodied carbon becomes an equally important twinned metric, analogous in our view to the toxicity of our buildings to the planet, much the way a single material can be toxic to our tenants. By choosing materials low in embodied carbon, high in recycled content, free from harmful chemicals, and ethically sourced and manufactured, we can bring New York City closer to its sustainability objectives and contribute positively to one of the largest collective efforts in the world to provide supportive, dignified, and healthy homes for all.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlotte. I'm the Vice President of Housing Services at Habitat for Humanity New York City in Westchester County. Also a grad of New School, Parsons, the Milano School of Public Policy. So it's cool to be here. Thanks for having me. So just a little bit about Habitat for Humanity New York City and Westchester County. We recently expanded to Westchester County about 3 years ago, so that's fairly new. Our CEO likes to say, if you've seen one habitat, you've seen one habitat. Because we do the things that we are known for, which is engage volunteers on construction sites and in other parts of the affordable housing development process. But at each habitat throughout the country and the world sort of operates differently. Here in New York City, we do build homes We do engage volunteers on our construction sites, but most of the work is done by licensed trades. We also have a preservation program where we work with, it was born from a critical home repair program after Superstorm Sandy. We then expanded to housing preservation in affordable limited equity co-ops throughout the city, engaging in construction rehab, also connecting co-op boards to financing and general technical assistance. And our housing preservation work is now also expanded to Westchester County, where we're working on flood mitigation relief with low and moderate income single-family homeowners predominantly, also aging in place repair, and we're working on a pilot of the accessory dwelling unit program funded by New York State. We also participate in advocacy and policy development at the city, state, and federal level. So that's a little bit about what we do in New York City. We serve working class New Yorkers. Our main AMI is 80%. We serve the AMI of between 50 and 80%, which currently 80% of AMI is about $80,000 for a single person household, or $113,000 for a family of four, just to provide a little context. And sometimes us housing people throw out AMI, like everybody knows what that is. And so we do require sweat equity from our home buyers, which includes, it can include construction, mostly education. The Housing Services Department, we are responsible for marketing our units, managing marketing, and we usher our applicants and home buyers through the home buying process, and which includes education, training, and then post-purchase compliance to stay in compliance with requirements of the projects that we develop. So all of our projects are subsidized in the city. As such, we have to comply with the Enterprise Green Community certification requirements. So this is a little bit of what we do on some of our recent projects that I'll highlight in a moment. And Enterprise Green Communities, I think, has been a pretty integral part of ensuring to bring in non-toxic building materials for the projects that we build, and also in-unit and construction site practices. So this is one of our completed projects, City House in Williamsbridge in the Bronx. At 57 units, City House is the largest habitat development in the world. I think a lot of people hear habitat and they associate it with single-family homes, but obviously in New York City we do it all. We do single-family, we do multifamily. So this was a great project, limited equity cooperative units. That includes a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments, including ample community space for the residents. The project that we call Seed in Brownsville, Brooklyn. This is also a multifamily development. 3 buildings in Brownsville. As you can see, the 3 buildings are at that corner, and they sort of run around the corner. We were given a kind of challenging spot to develop in, which is often the case for affordable homeowner developers. So we created the entry of the building. When you walk into the main building, there's a courtyard that's in the middle of all 3 buildings. And so the shared courtyard includes bike parking, patio space, landscaping throughout with trees and native plants, and 6 raised garden beds for edible and decorative planting. And also native trees and plantings are situated outside of the property to assist with water retention and also air quality. So this current project that we have under construction will be 16 newly constructed modular homes or rehabilitated net zero ready single family homes in Southeast Queens. These were on sites that were formerly owned by NYCHA, and Habitat was able to acquire them. 3 of the homes are rehabbed, the other 13 are modular. They're all highly efficient electric homes equipped with solar panels, variety of layouts and sizes, private backyards, washer, dryer hookups, and energy efficient appliances. So this is really like the crown jewel of our current projects. This is kind of where we want to be focusing moving forward. And many of you might already know, but a net zero ready home is equipped to produce as much energy as it uses. The energy production and consumption zero each other out. So the capability not only results in homes that are healthy and comfortable all year round, but also reduces the carbon footprint of the home, as well as operating costs for heating, cooling, and cooking, which is a real main focus of ours since we are creating affordable homeownership units that we want to be financially sustainable long term. And the homes will be on RiseBoro Community Land Trust to ensure permanent affordability, so that it's not just affordable to the first home buyer, but every home buyer thereafter. And here's just a rendering. The right side is one of the modular units. Those are being produced in a factory in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, by a contractor called MSS. And then on the left is one of the rehabbed homes.
Such a treat to be here. I appreciate the invites and thank you, Sheets. I just, a couple of things. I am not a graduate of Parsons, so I feel, do not look down upon me. I appreciate that. And also interestingly, I think I'm the only one on the panel that's not directly involved, let's say, day to day in affordable housing design and implementation of affordable housing in New York, but have connections with work that we've done through Habitat and with Sheets in the past, and bringing some of the design concepts and ideas from Hines, what we're doing to this panel. So my name is not there anymore, but so I'm Ben Rodney. I'm with a company called Hines. We're a global real estate development firm based out of Houston, but we have our offices here in New York. We're in over 30 countries around the world, in over 300 cities. Traditionally focused on office building construction around the globe, but also in today's environment, we have multifamily projects, industrial projects, office, mixed use, and it runs the gamut, including affordable housing in many of our cities around the United States and in Europe, along with a whole stable of timber construction buildings now, which is quite interesting. So I think part of what and my background is in mechanical engineering, so I did graduate from Lehigh University with a mechanical engineering degree and worked in an engineering firm here in New York City for 7 years before coming to Hines. One of the focuses that I've had over the past few years extensively is on how to decarbonize our building stock, not only here in New York, but around the United States, and working with our teams in Europe and domestically to come up with not engineering solutions or holistic architectural solutions to do that. This is obviously not a rendering of the full building, but we're working on a project right now downtown called 345 Hudson Street. It's an office building tied to another office building we built called 555, where we're implementing some major decarbonization techniques to reduce the energy needs of that building by about 30%, along with reduce the carbon of a 1 million square foot building from essentially our worst performing building to our best performing building. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about how some of the strategies that we're implementing on large scale projects can be brought back to either affordable housing or small scale projects. And about 10 years ago, I got connected with Charlotte and with Habitat for Humanity through ASHRAE New York, which is an engineering society, a global engineering society. And our chapter was invited to do a build day on Staten Island for the Jimmy Carter Build Day for Sandy relief. And it just kicked off an entire relationship for the next decade of our organization working with Habitat to bring engineering expertise to not only projects like the Sydney House that you just saw, doing peer reviews, design work, connecting them with world-class consultants, but also getting involved with the preservation work, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then also in the two projects that we worked on recently related to seniors housing are both here located in New York, both completed projects where I never thought I would learn that much about seniors housing, and next thing you know, it is an entire another world of learning how to design and what that means and the differences between multifamily building and seniors housing, and how some of the lessons that we learned on these projects I think could be implemented in any type of seniors housing project. So we'll touch on that a little bit, but appreciate you having me here today. So thank you.
Hi everyone. Hi. How y'all doing? I'm Drew Vandenberg, Senior Project Manager at RiseBoro Community Partnership. thank you for having me today, and yes, also went to grad school here at Design and Urban Ecologies, and after going there, ended up working as a real estate developer. So then I was very confused about my identity since I do come from a theater background. So what I now say is that I am a activist in the costume of real estate development. So let's see how this goes. Strategizing healthy materials into affordable housing development. So first a little bit about RiseBoro. RiseBoro has been in the community since 1973. That's the New York City community, but also specifically Bushwick-based. And we have 5 vertically integrated service divisions. You can see below: seniors, housing, education, health, and empowerment. So we really are a nonprofit that does mostly social services and community-based, holistic development, but we have housing as a brick-and-mortar resource. Based in Bushwick, expanding citywide, meeting citywide demand/need, and our mission is we unleash the potential of communities to thrive no matter the odds. So, how do I fit into all of this? I say, an activist in developers' clothing, agitating for improvement in a complex ecosystem. So, rather than reading all of these things, you can see that at the different phases of a project, from conception and acquisition to management, to design, to financing, to construction, I touch it all. And as a project manager on a housing project, you really are responsible for representing the project's interest, which is the community's interest, or the future tenant's interest, to every single one of these stakeholders, and convincing all of these people to do the right thing. That's really what I'm talking about today. How do you convince them all to do the right thing? And sometimes they don't know what that is, and I like to start with, the neighbors, the immediate site stakeholders, the folks in the neighborhood where the project is sited should ultimately drive the agenda of what is needed, but sometimes it's not that simple. You have to find a happy medium, you have to basically persuade everyone and sort of be an insurgent within the system to make sure you can get these healthy materials built into the project. So here are some projects that I've worked on. Broadway Triangle, and I highlighted some things that aren't exactly healthy materials related, but just like other features that we can talk about later if you'd like. But a building currently under construction in Broadway Triangle, where we navigated historical community tensions, designed by Marvel Design. A project in Woodlawn, the Bronx, with 80 senior units, bespoke passive design by Castrucci Architects. The atrium at Sumner, which is 190 units for seniors on a NYCHA infill site, which has this awesome interior green garden space, and it was designed by Stuart Liebeskin. And now I'm also working on a preservation project, which is RiseBoro TPT Round 10. If you're familiar with the third-party transfer program, where we keep existing buildings in the community with intensive community engagement and fix their buildings up and turn them all electric, passive house ideally, although we might not need it, and keep everybody rent stabilized for life in the building. Now, I wanted to talk about this project today specifically because this is a project where we partnered with the Healthy Materials Lab. And I worked for the Healthy Materials Lab when I was in Parsons doing videography and video editing for them. And then they reached out to me years later and said, hey, Stat Architecture was designing these buildings. They also had a relationship with the Healthy Materials Lab, and they said, could we do it? Like, put the healthy materials in this affordable housing project. Let's make it happen. And so I have continued to convince my bosses, and the design was amazing. Like, I love the designs for these buildings, but now we have to make sure that the GC does it right. These are currently under construction and just closed in December. So this project is called Bushwick Alliance. It's 28 units, an HPD low-income housing tax credit project where we needed to write the application and win it. The AMIs will be 27% to 77% AMI, which, when you talk to folks and you talk to AMI, it sounds like a dodge, because really the point is the rents will be, some of them like $600 a month for some of these units, and the highest rents in these units for a 2.5 bedroom is going to be like $2,000 a month. So they really are, when you talk about affordable housing, it's like the actual affordable housing that people are doing every once in a while, not the 130% AMI, which technically counts. We have a homeless set-aside in this project, just 4 apartments. All electric, passive house, solar panels on the big building. It's a 20 unit there, and then a 2 4-unit. And then it was also a recipient of the NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence Award, which is a program that gives a little bit of grant money that you have to spend on, better things. In this case, we did low-embodied carbon. We can get to that in the next slide, I think. Under construction now, should be finished 2 years from now. Okay, so these were the healthy materials that we actually specified to be in this project, and the reasons, or I guess the advocates that made it possible. So, NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence was where we promised to do low embodied carbon in the concrete and grout of the building. So this is just basically specifying a certain PSI that the GC will be required to have in the ready mix. And this goes back to a whole HML initiative when we learned about the glass pozzolon that you can put in the cement. I don't know if some of you know what I'm talking about, but they actually take like Coca-Cola bottles or whatever, and they smash it up and they sort it by color, and then they grind it into sand, and then the concrete can still be just as strong as industry grade concrete, but obviously more expensive. But in the spec, you can't really tell the GC which concrete to buy, but you just require them to meet a certain PSI of post-consumer recycled material. So we did that, and that's what we promised to do for NYSERDA, so now the state's holding us to it. Healthy Materials Lab consulted with our architect and gave us this list of options that we fit into the spec rather recently. And then we always do enterprise green community, so you've got your standard stuff like low VOC paint and formaldehyde-free items. And lastly, RiseBoro keeps a certain standard for post-construction healthiness. So you have to have phthalate-free upholstery on your homeless furnishings and the common area furnishings. You have to have non-toxic cleaning supplies for the ongoing maintenance of them. So I think this is a good list of just what's possible for not too much extra cost. And now I'm going to talk about that in my nearly final slide. No, first I'll talk about passive house, then I'll talk about cost. And really, I don't even want to get into this right now, but most of you know about passive house. Can I see a show of hands who knows what a passive house building is? We're in a design school, so I figured it's basically becoming the building standard now, and so we don't need to talk about it. But there are features and benefits, and end of the day, anecdotally or actually, statistically speaking, it's healthier and better for the environment and the tenants. But yeah, maybe it costs a little more to build, but it also looks super cool, and we can do it, and we're doing it. It's the RiseBoro basis of design for all our buildings, including this one. Yeah, there's that. Although I will add that if you have a passive house building and you use unhealthy materials, then you're just recycling the same toxic air. So please do both. Okay? Now this is my last slide. A budget is an ethical document. Everything's negotiable, including time. Don't take cost for an answer. A better way is possible. So in short, as the manager of the project, it is my job to convince everyone to pay for it. I also run the budgets, so I just raise all the numbers up and I say, this is what it's going to be, and then price it out there. And usually, if you start with the expectation that we're going to do it the right way, and it's awesome, and you talk about it a lot, then people get on board. You get everybody on board from the beginning, even if it takes longer. And I used to think that, like, oh no, it's the city government, how are we going to do it? And then I realized, like, we voted for them, they work for us. Really. The projects are not driven by the community, unfortunately, and they're not driven by the government, they're driven from the middle by the people who manage the day-to-day of the project. So get your head in the details of the budgets and the design documents and make sure that the details are good. Alright, that's it. Yeah, so it must always be customized to the site and the community that you're building for, right? And like I think if you're building an office building, you might be caring more about what you put in your concrete or your glass, especially if your budget is ginormous, versus if you're building a small building in a neighborhood with neighbors who really care about the site, then it might be more about the finishes or the interiors or the community space. And that should be done, but it's really difficult to do that because the engagement with the residents can't always drive the project. So I think I'm not really professional on the design side, so I'm not going to speak to the materials that should be chosen, but we do know basically what everybody wants. They want big space with comfy surfaces and like ideally colorful, or at least not garish, but like not boring looking spaces. And they don't want it to be too crowded, and they want it to work correctly and be clean and have big windows. And at a certain point, you can't have it all. And so what I just say is, if you're engaging with the community to try to customize what you're delivering to them, you need to set clear parameters. Here's what we can do, here's what we can't. Here's the timeline. And then be honest about the timeline's probably going to change. Or, you know, I'm going to try to do this for you, but then I have to go back to the banker and the investor and see if it's possible, you know? And like that way you build trust. Even if it doesn't happen at the end, then they'll say, at least we got to meet the people who were building the building, you know, and we had a conversation with them. Give them something, you know, even if it's just choosing the color of the material, you know. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think not being on the, you know, design and construction side directly, being more on the housing services, I don't get to make any of the decisions. But I do have to deliver a lot of the information to the home buyers or homeowners. And so, you know, there is a bit of a tension between like our housing services team and our real estate construction team, which is okay, it's kind of a part of the work. But so, you know, we have to advocate for not just getting to the closing table, like what happens after the project closes and sells, you know, what are we like putting in this community? And so, because for us, it's like we have to handle the fallout of what happens after. And so oftentimes, you know, low toxic, no toxic materials also tend to be higher quality. So let's, you know, put the effort in now. Maybe it's going to be a bit more expensive, maybe it's going to take longer, but it will save us in dividends down the line because we'll have a better product, people will be happier with it, and it's easier for them to manage. You know, whether it's cleaning it, or they'll just be happier with it down the line. So it's also like very practical coming from that perspective of like, let's think about what's going to happen. And so much of development in the city is about like just getting to the closing table, And so what we try to do on my team is advocate for what happens after closing, because also since we are, you know, developing homes that are going to be on a community land trust, we are developing homes that have permanent affordability built in, we are signing up for a long-term relationship with the, you know, community assets that we're building. And so we have to be really cognizant of what that looks like down the line. So making that connection between development and post-purchase or post-development.
A lot of pressure to represent design now. Yeah. For my perspective at least, it's a little bit challenging to actually represent the tenants of our buildings directly because we have so little interaction with them prior to the project being complete. And then it's an additional challenge after the completion of the building to actually kind of maintain the relationship with the building owners and, you know, establish post-occupancy analyses and like learn from those experiences more directly. So for better or for worse, throughout the kind of early stages of the process, our relationship to the tenants is through the owner of the building, who very often is a nonprofit organization that's been working with tenants who are low income, and in the case of the building I'm working right now, many of them are formerly homeless. So it's kind of, we depend on the building owner, our client in that case, to represent for us the needs of the people who live in their buildings. We try and translate that through whatever the specific site constraints are, and whatever we think are the unique design opportunities presented by those to build something that not only has the helping materials we're all talking about, but has a kind of like a unique tactile aesthetic approach that offers a place that's like a unique home for them versus something that's considered like a boilerplate approach, which we're so often pushed towards because it takes so much time and labor to be vetting and analyzing new materials for every single project. But we find it very valuable to do that work because you end up with something that, with a product that is, for lack of a better word, unique. And especially for the types of people who are our tenants, I think that goes a long way to make them feel like they're being cared for and being seen in an environment that doesn't often do that.
Yeah. Actually, I was just thinking about as Charlotte was talking about some of the projects that Habitat's done, and I think that these questions matter whether you're designing a building from scratch in a new building or you're having to preserve and take a building that already exists and work with the constraints that are there. And so I was thinking about the community partnerships and trust that you had to build in the community when first bringing Sydney House to the table and trying to say who are those stakeholders within. First, is there a need in this neighborhood, not just generally is there a need in New York, is there a need in this specific neighborhood and where we want to develop this, and then who are those members of the community that we need to support from, and whether it's from city council, whether it's religious leaders, whether it's the people there, because there are no, if it's a new building, there are no residents, there's no one there yet, but if an existing building and you're trying to renovate it, you're going to have a lot more opinions right there, so I'm always thinking about, hey, if we have a new building, I can kind of do whatever I want. If I have an existing building, I got to work with what I have. And so when we're also looking at developments, and I was thinking of one that we did a large-scale master plan down at Walter Reed down in Washington, D.C., with the hospitals and medical center in that area. But we're also developing multiple projects from market rate housing to seniors housing, but also affordable housing and co-living and multi-generational housing. And so there was a lot of research done to understand, is there a need for these types of facilities in this community? Not just because the city's asking us to do it, but if we build this, will people actually rent it? Will we, we can't do it for free, there's supposed to be a profit involved, but ultimately we found, okay, there is a desire, the city wants it, we built it, and now it's renting out extremely well. Even though the seniors housing we did here in New York was not affordable, it had to be, which in Manhattan, we had to understand, was there a need for it? And there was certainly a need for that, and we had to judge, okay, well, what kind of building would the community want in this area? And then we went ahead and built it, and now it's doing very well, but in all of our master planning projects now outside of Manhattan, where we can actually look at making it more affordable seniors housing, we can take a lot of those design aspects and that becomes a tool in our toolkit to work with those communities because there's a substantial need for these types of opportunities that are a little bit less traditional types of housing. So it's something that we're thinking about a lot.
One of the big, it's going to sound really, really boring, but it's unit planning. We spend an inordinate amount of time unit planning because equity for, I'm just thinking specifically of the projects I'm working on now, when you have a mix of different tenant types. There's an incentive kind of just built into the way that the projects are financed, and I can't speak too deeply about it because it's not my expertise, to give, it's going to sound bad, but to give the worst units to those who are paying the least. It's just a financial incentive, right? So we have to kind of try and work against that immediately by planning a building such that there really is no bad place to live or a place that's worse than any other. So the people who are the kind of most vulnerable and the kind of least assisted in previous parts of their lives are basically on an equal playing field with everybody else in the building. So it comes down to really, really boring small scale stuff like making sure kitchen arrangements are really, really carefully detailed in size so that everyone has like enough storage. They're all made easily adaptable, whether you have, I know, if you're mobility assisted or hearing visually impaired. So usually you're only required to like make those units for a small handful of those in the entire building, but we try to make every single unit basically have the exact same capabilities as the others. And then space planning as well, so you're just arranging the buildings or the units around the building such that all of them have kind of equal amounts of space and light and views and access to amenities and all that kind of stuff. So that's the first place that we start, but it really kind of continues throughout. We're still adjusting and working on that throughout the CA process on buildings as well.
Maybe we'll also ask yourself, Ben, to respond to that question, given that you don't day-to-day do affordable housing, but so much of Hines projects create public space and where they're built. So how do you approach sites and communities and equity care? What strategies do you guys look to doing that research?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak a little bit about learning about the seniors housing that we've done and making sure that it's appropriate for someone that is not only, say, doesn't have any memory care issues now, but may develop that or age in place. And so how can you take, so I kept thinking about this, the design features for building a selection building, there's no reason they couldn't be built into an affordable seniors housing project. It was just simply thinking about, like Brandon was talking about, unit layouts and how things are actually arranged that made all the difference. And then I was visiting a relative this weekend. She's at a rehab facility in Queens, and it's not a great place to be. And I'm just thinking, boy, I wish I could get her out of here into a better place. We're trying to do that soon. But even in, you were talking about the adaptable projects, and so thinking about, look, if someone is pulling into that, are they going to be able to reach a microwave? Should they even have a microwave in their unit? Is this going to be a detriment to them down the line? If they're walking around the building, is this going to be a safe place for them? Like, how are the patterns in the carpet arranged? How are the walls? What are the colors of the walls? How's someone that has lost their vision going to see that? What does the artwork look like? And is that something that might scare them? Or like even things that you found things in the carpet. So it was kind of like, well, these aren't like expensive things to design for a project. They're just things you gotta think about for the person that's actually going to be using the building. When the lighting, I mean, when Sheetza was interning at Hines, we spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about the lighting design of the building and what was going to be appropriate for that type of resident, and are there options that are, you know, you can implement in any type of building regardless of the cost of the project. But you know, those purpose-built and adaptive designs is certainly a lesson, something to think about a lot.
You know, and it's obvious, right? Good design is important. Like, for us to say that good design is important isn't, you know, anything that, you know, shows that we've got any particular insight. But in this space, it's critically important in senior housing and affordable housing that we really think about the occupants of those spaces and how they live their lives. So I think that it just speaks to, you know, some of the challenges of affordable housing when that doesn't happen, right? When the spaces are too small, when the layout doesn't work. I've seen affordable housing where the closets don't work. You know, there's this kind of basic thing of how would you hang your clothes? Where would you put your clothes? So I think stating the obvious sometimes is hugely important.
Yeah, just to add on, sometimes the minimum requirements are minimum just because they are that, and you have to plan in kind of extra consideration for space, like for hanging clothes and closets. Like we run into problems where we'll think we'll have closets like really well designed and planned for so that you could hang all of your clothes and your bulky coats and stuff in there. But then as soon as they start doing all the electrical drawings, you figure out that you have to put like a Con Edison panel in the middle of that layout, like none of your shelves that fit. So like that stuff like throws a wrench into your plans late in the design process, and you kind of have to learn to anticipate that very early on, and kind of like build in like these buffers and like your space planning to kind of accommodate for these changes later on. And I'm really glad you mentioned the quality of the lighting as well, not only from like the daylight, but from an electrical lighting perspective as well. It made me immediately think of one of the most boring things in unit planning, which is smoke soffits, which are required. But they have to be at least a foot deep from the bottom surface to the top surface of the smoke soffit. It's a really boring code thing, I'm sorry. But in some cases, it becomes an opportunity if you plan your ceilings well enough and you kind of space that out properly. You could install things like cove lighting inside of the smoke soffit, and then you have to work with your engineers to make sure that it doesn't interrupt sprinklers or anything like that. We've successfully done that on several projects where now you have a volumetric lighting environment in a relatively small kitchenette, and it makes these places that have relatively low ceiling heights and tight space constraints feel so much more upscale for, I can't think of a better word than that, to find out, especially with lighting, to put the money in the project early on, to make sure that we're drawing things like downlights in living rooms into all of our RCPs from day one, so it becomes assumed into the project budget when those things are almost always not provided. Instead of just like a switch outlet or something like that for attendance, like sconce or something like that. But having that stuff kind of built in allows you to have these conversations really, really early on with your developers and with your owners to make sure it gets kind of baked in. Concrete, so to speak.
I'll start. It goes back to what I said about controlling the budget and just paying attention to the details from the beginning. And so, I think that's like piece number one. And you also said that a second ago, if the design documents from the first draft have the nicer items, then your GC can't later say, oh, we didn't see that until 6 months later, this pricing is old. It's like, no, you missed it. If they missed it, they missed it. But like, you can point to these things are what we, the owner, the client, we want this. And your architect should draw it, but then the GC has to also price it, and they should probably have a manufacturer who they're talking to early on to give them pricing. So that's one big piece of it. It's like just really early on getting it in. But another thing that I wanted to say to this question is, unfortunately, it has to do with who you know. It does have to do a little bit with political power in the industry and who you have sway over in the industry. And so, like, who's the landowner of this project? Like, what is the inception of the project in the first place? Like, what is the funding sources? How generous are your funders? If this is a government project, how generous is the funding? Are they going to term sheet? Are they going to go over term sheet because they like you, basically? And one thing, which is maybe a bad lesson, but I think a true lesson that I've learned in my time as a developer, is that everything's negotiable, and therefore, if you don't get the answer you want to hear, call the next person until you get the answer you want to hear. I don't know if that's a good lesson, but like, the truth is, like, the city right now wants to build as much housing as humanly possible, and they have tons of money to do it. They have no staff. They don't know how to manage any of their projects. So we can kind of drive it. We can just say, yeah, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. And then I think it gets done better.
Is there anyone from the city?
Yeah, relationships are really important because, I think some of the recent policies that have passed, like now every new development has to do a solar analysis. And if, the project is going to be, if it's beneficial to have solar, it's required. And every building has to be, equipped for electricity, and that's it. No gas hookups in new construction. And I think all of those requirements are really great and essential to actually making change. It's a challenge on the side of like marketing and selling those units because people are like, oh, I don't want an electric stove, and so we have to kind of work on like promoting that and sort of like explaining that to people up front and like why it's a benefit, why it's important. And from a preservation aspect, it's like the city requires, I think it's local law 83, there's a suite of local laws that, require, one of them is like buildings over 50,000 square feet and 25,000 square feet have to benchmark their usage every year. And so for affordable limited equity co-ops, cool, okay, we have to spend money every year to get this report, from a firm that provides that. And then we have this information, what do we do with it? We don't have the money, to put in these upgrades. And essentially will make our building better for us and better for the community. So that's like kind of a policy miss a little bit when the mandate comes without any support. And so the relationships are huge, because then it's like, you know, we call ASHRAE and you're like, hey, do you like know contacts that we can like access to provide, you know, like maybe more affordable services for these like reports, or can you kind of like guide us, like where can we go? I mean, for habitat, relationships are huge. You know, when Net Zero was under, when we were doing like the pre-development, I mean, and once the project closed, we almost couldn't afford to include those solar panels in it. And that was just like a reality of, you know, the budget changing over time and costs going up. Ultimately, like we made it work, but that had to do with relationships, like accessing that extra funding. So sometimes you have to like build the ship as you're sailing it, and you know, sometimes like you have to like get creative, and I do think relationships are a huge part of that, but like the most well-intentioned policies can end up, like the local law 97 that's gone into effect recently, there's been so much consternation and pushback about that, and you know, you hate to see it because ultimately it's a good thing, you know, it's getting us to lower emissions, like we have to do this, but you can't saddle this, and especially when we're talking about low to moderate income homeowners in these buildings, like you can't saddle these people when already costs for operating buildings are just skyrocketing. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm from like Revney and like a landlord organization, because they're saying like, we can't afford rent stabilized units, but no, I mean like operating costs are going up, and so even, you know, landlords and property owners do need like options to access, you know, subsidy or financing to make these improvements in buildings. So I do think that like we have, the policy often does lead, but we have to be advocating for like, well, how are we going to make it happen in an affordable world? Because it's not like we don't want to do these things, it's just oftentimes like really challenging. So bringing along the home buyers and the homeowners and the renters, I think, is like really important, but we also can't set them up for like something that they can't fulfill, like especially in our world of like homeownership, where it's like we're saddling with you with these like compliance requirements that like, good luck, you know. So that's like another aspect of building a long-term relationship with our projects, is that we want to be there to, you know, connect them to resources. You know, we have homeowner help desks, and we have presentations about like best practices for keeping your energy consumption low, and like what to, you know, how products to use to clean your home. I mean, things like that, like across the gamut, and how to access, you know, New York City Accelerator. That's a great resource for, you know, where to find these programs, subsidies, how to access funding to do the upgrades and retrofits that you need to improve your building. But it takes so much coordination, I guess, is like my point. Ultimately, it's like none of this just kind of happens in a vacuum. And so it's like, I think we are like creating, we're involved in these communities long term, and we're creating opportunities. We're also kind of like responsible, I guess, for long term like sustainability. It does, you know, so for us, I think that's like another really important aspect of our commitment to the work.